Did Jeffrey Epstein win an $85 million Powerball jackpot in 2008? That's the shocking allegation repeated by figures like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Joe Rogan, who have treated it as an established fact. Now, it sounds absolutely preposterous until you learn that multi-million-dollar lottery prizes in America have been rigged before, and that lawyers for Epstein's victims took it so seriously as to ask multiple witnesses about it under oath. The key question in this case is who is behind the Zorro Trust that won the lottery in 2008. My name is Alexander Webb. I'm the founder of The Studies Show, which uses academic research as a lens to understand our world. Previously, I've written for the New York Times and National Geographic. I first heard about this conspiracy theory online, and I thought it was going to be a straightforward debunk, maybe a 500-word article. But after spending weeks researching this topic, I'm actually left with more questions than answers. So that 500-word article is now a multi-part series. And this series goes deeper than anything else on the topic that I've seen. Along the way, we'll explore the psychology of conspiracies, look at the ways the lottery has actually been rigged over the years, the math of coincidences, and we'll hear from people and institutions close to the 2008 Powerball win. No matter what we find, we're going to learn a lot. So let's dive in. As most people know by now, Jeffrey Epstein was a sex offender worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But Epstein is genuinely unusual because the full source of his money is still unaccounted for. In public reporting and in court documents, he's described as a college dropout who passed himself off as a financial wizard. He operated shell companies dealing with over $1 billion, and in the 1980s, he appeared to use a fake Austrian passport with a fake name, which also claimed he lived in Saudi Arabia. His story is so strange that if you told it to somebody a decade ago, they wouldn't believe it was true. In the 1990s, Epstein bought a ranch in New Mexico, which he called the Zorro Ranch. He formed a trust called the Zorro Trust. That trust seems to have held the title to the ranch. Now, you might be asking yourself, what's a trust? A trust is a legal structure that holds assets on behalf of someone. You can create it, you can put money, you can put property in it, and it's managed according to the rules that you set. Now, one key thing about a trust is that it has its own name. So it can own things, it can receive money, and it can do business without your personal name being attached. There's no central registry of trusts, and there's no prohibition against multiple people calling their trust the exact same thing. So somebody else legitimately could have chosen the name Zorro Trust for their trust with no connection to Epstein. However, it also could be Epstein's Zorro Trust. We simply don't know because that information is protected by Oklahoma law. That's essentially the main reason this conspiracy has remained unanswered for so many years. When I started investigating the Zorro Trust, I went back to old newspapers from the 1990s. Now, in newspapers in New Mexico, you can find the Zorro Trust mentioned. Now, it's doing boring stuff like applying for water or land use permits, etc. In the 90s, there's nothing remarkable about the Zorro Trust as far as the public record is concerned. The Zorro Trust enters the news again in the mid-2000s when it becomes one of the largest donors to New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson. Now, the Zorro Trust again makes the news when Epstein is arrested for the first time. Bill Richardson says that he's going to donate the money Epstein gave him to charity. Bill Richardson was accused of wrongdoing by at least one of Epstein's victims, but that's not the focus of this series. Now, here's where it gets interesting. On June 30th, 2008, Jeffrey Epstein is sentenced to 18 months in a Florida jail, a deal almost universally seen as extraordinarily lenient because he could have faced life in federal prison on federal charges. He was allowed to leave jail for roughly half of each day on work release at an organization that he created just before going to jail. Unusually, his unnamed co-conspirators were also granted immunity. 2 days later, on July 2nd, 2008, Powerball drew its numbers. A winning ticket had been sold at a convenience store in Altus, Oklahoma, with a population of roughly 20,000. Altus is about 400 miles from the Zorro ranch in neighboring New Mexico. Now, although the ticket is sold in early July, we don't hear anything about the ticket again until late August. On August 25th, newspapers report that an entity called Zorro Trust had claimed the prize through a heritage trust company in Oklahoma City. Now, at the time, newly passed legislation in Oklahoma meant that winners could claim prizes anonymously through a trust. As part of this law, the names of the winners would be disclosed to the Lottery Commission to check for back taxes or child support payments, but otherwise they could remain anonymous and these names would not be reported publicly. That means if anybody knows who really won, it's the Oklahoma Lottery Commission. Now, I contacted the Oklahoma Lottery Commission, and in a future episode, I'll tell you what they told me. But newsflash, it didn't crack the case. The next day, the Oklahoman ran a slightly longer article. In that article, a local grocery store meat manager claims that a woman who used to work at the store had won the jackpot. Now, he refused to tell the reporter the name of the woman. Now, that single quote holds enormous weight in the debunker's case that Epstein did not win the lottery. In 2019, Bloomberg did a brief article on this topic, and some people on social media have cited it as Bloomberg debunking the theory. But the Bloomberg article simply cites the Oklahoman article. There's no new information. It's not a true debunk, and the Oklahoman article is a well-written article, but it's a local news article from 2008 when people just weren't thinking about an Epstein connection. Now, even though the Oklahoman reported that a woman who used to work in a grocery store won, the conspiracy theories persist. And the conspiracy theories go something like this. Epstein won the lottery the day after he reported to jail, possibly as payment by an unnamed entity, possibly as a method to launder money, or possibly just because the whole lottery system was rigged. There's no one conspiracy theory that explains all the details. By nature, conspiracy theories thrive when there's unclear information and conflicting signals. Now, the case against the conspiracy is relatively simple. One, the basic statistical improbability of anybody winning the lottery. Two, the fact that Powerball should be difficult or impossible to rig. And three, that single quote from the meat manager in a grocery store in Altus, Oklahoma, who says that his female coworker won. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to briefly talk about the statistics of winning the lottery because that's very important to frame everything else around here. In 2008, there was around a 1 in 150 million chance of winning the Powerball jackpot. Now, if you drive in the United States, you have a roughly 1 in 80 million chance of dying on a per mile basis that you drive a vehicle. That means if you drive a single mile to buy a Powerball ticket, you're roughly twice as likely to die on the way there as you are to win the Powerball jackpot. Now, if you have to drive 1 mile to the store and 1 mile to go back, of course, you're 4 times more likely to die on the road than you are to win that Powerball jackpot. This is just to say that for anybody, the odds of winning the jackpot are extraordinarily low. So from the beginning, we're going to discount the idea that Epstein could have won by chance. Almost no possibility. If Epstein did win, we're going to go with the theory that something nefarious may have happened. But of course, at this point early in the series, we're not taking a viewpoint. We're simply following the facts wherever they may lead. Now, that article we've just talked about from the Oklahoman is almost all the first-hand reporting we have on the 2008 lottery win. But the recent release of the Epstein files by the Justice Department has added more fuel to the fire, because Powerball is mentioned multiple times. Now, one document in the Epstein files flat out claims Epstein won the lottery. If you've been following this case, you probably saw this one on the internet. But here's the problem. It's not an agent or administrator or even a lawyer admitting it. It's not Epstein himself or Ghislaine or anybody else. It's a tip from a journalist to the FBI. The problem is the tip gets a few details wrong. It says Epstein won in New Mexico, and the grand prize amount is close but not quite right. What probably happened is that journalists saw the same reporting everybody else did, assumed that the odds of somebody else naming their trust, the Zorro Trust, was very low, and claim that Epstein won. As far as I know, that journalist did not have any secret inside information proving a win. If they did have that information, we would have expected that to come out in all these years. Now, several other files imply, although they don't directly confirm the win. Notably, both Epstein's pilot and flight engineer were asked in legal depositions whether they knew about Epstein's lottery win, and it was phrased that way, as though it were a confirmed fact. And when both witnesses said no, the lawyers repeated the question. Now, there are also other mentions of Powerball or the lottery in the files. Epstein apparently bought tickets for friends, and in the 2010s, once he was out of jail in Florida, his accountant would send messages to people like Woody Allen, yes, that famous Woody Allen, saying something like, Jeff wants me to buy you $24 of Powerball tickets, here's the numbers, I'm going to keep them in a safe in case you win, good luck. But none of these people seem to have won. Now, before we get to the questions that are genuinely still hard to answer, let's clear out some of the weak conspiracy theories first so we can get to the juicy stuff. Conspiracy theory 1, the Powerball drawing was delayed. Now, there's a viral Medium post from 2019, which has since been deleted, but you can still find it archived on the web. And in that post, the author claims that there was a technical error on the night of the drawing, meaning that it couldn't air live and it had to be verified by an auditing firm. Now, Grok on X, used to be Twitter, sometimes repeats this, sometimes it says it's not true. That would be an extremely suspicious event, given everything we know, especially since the lottery has been rigged before, including in Oklahoma, in the Hot Lotto scandal, which we'll cover later. But here's the problem. I couldn't find any evidence that this actually happened, and I went pretty deep. So I went to scans of newspapers printed the very next morning, and a few East Coast papers from July 3rd didn't print the Powerball numbers. And that looked suspicious until you realize that those same papers routinely missed other drawings too, and it was just probably a printing schedule issue. The only times I could really find papers that didn't print the numbers the next day were basically papers deep on the East Coast, so like Maine or maybe somewhere in Pennsylvania, and they say the Powerball numbers weren't available at the time of printing, but you know they're drawing the Powerball at 10 p.m. in Iowa, so that's already 11 p.m. on the East Coast. If they're finalizing the print edition and don't want to sneak that in like at midnight or whatever, that's not that suspicious. Now, I did find a Tennessee newspaper report on a Powerball delay due to technical errors. But the problem is it was for a different drawing later that month. And the very same paper printed the July 2nd numbers, of course on July 3rd in the morning, right on schedule. So it does look like there were delays in the Powerball drawings, but it was a couple weeks later, not the night of July 2nd. Now, this conspiracy theory likely started because right next to the announcement of the lottery win in the Oklahoman, there is a notice about a technical error in the lottery. But that's for an entirely different game on a different date. It's just not the same thing. No newspaper reported on a technical error in the Powerball, and they did report about technical errors in Powerball, not on that date, and so I just don't buy it. I think almost certainly there was not a delay in the Powerball drawing. Conspiracy theory 2, Epstein won the lottery twice. Now, there are some social media accounts that claim not only did Epstein win the Powerball once, but he won twice. But I found no evidence of a second jackpot win at all. Now, this claim is probably technically true in a really trivial sense. If Epstein was buying all these Powerball tickets for his friends in the 2010s, and given that the odds of winning any prize are about 1 in 25, then of course, yes, somebody almost certainly won a few dollars, but winning $3 is very different from winning the jackpot. So, verdict, it's almost certainly false in any way that matters. I couldn't find any evidence that Epstein won the lottery twice. Now, conspiracy theory number 3, the newspaper quote was added later. When I was first researching this, I took the original reporting from the Oklahoman and put it in the Wayback Machine just to see how far back the story went. To my surprise, I couldn't find any archives of the story earlier than 2019. And 2019 is when Epstein died, so it seems a little bit suspicious that I couldn't find this story anywhere on the internet. before 2019. I started to be like, wow, this looks really suspicious. But I went to the archives and I got a scan of the newspaper from August 2008. So article was the same as today. There's no conspiracy theory about them adding a different newspaper story after Epstein died. Now, before we go any further, I want to take a step back. After all, this is the studies show, so let's talk about what the research says about what's happening in our brains and what happens when people deal with conspiracy theories. Now, there's a 2014 paper that studied what happens when you show people evidence against a conspiracy theory. Now, in this paper, they showed people evidence essentially debunking the claim that vaccines cause autism. But what they found was striking. For people who believe the conspiracy most strongly, for people who believed that vaccines cause autism, showing them evidence against it actually backfired. They believe in the conspiracy even more after being shown evidence that it wasn't true. If we conclude at the end of this series that Epstein probably didn't win, I know a hardcore group of believers are going to persist. They might even think that I'm in on some sort of cover-up or conspiracy, and that's not just speculation, that's what the research appears to show. So it's important to understand that when we're talking about conspiracy theories like this, depending on your priors, that's going to really affect how you look at the evidence and how you look at this or other similar investigations. So where does this leave us? We can be pretty confident that there was no delay in the drawing, that there was no second jackpot win, and there was no tampering with the original reporting. But we're still left with the core, unanswered, sort of eerie question. Was it really a coincidence that an anonymous trust with the exact same name won the Powerball just 2 days after Epstein went to jail? And why did lawyers who presumably have access to lots of documents through discovery, documents that we probably still haven't seen, why did those lawyers ask 2 separate witnesses about this question? And why does it seem like the entire case that it wasn't Epstein rely on a combination of statistical improbability and a single unnamed source relayed secondhand in one newspaper article a long time ago? In part 2, we'll lay out every coincidence I could find, including a few that I've seen nobody else report on. We'll look at how the lottery's been rigged in the past, including 8-figure jackpots, and whether it could have been rigged in this case. And we'll hear from somebody close to the original story. Subscribe so you don't miss part 2. This is The Studies Show. I'm Alexander Webb. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this investigation and like to support us, you could sign up for our Substack at thestudiesshow.com, or even just hit the subscribe button on our YouTube. We're a growing channel, so we could really use your support. Thank you so much. See you soon.